Imagine living with a devastating disease that not only causes chronic pain, but can also lead to death. And what if you pass that trait onto your kids? We're talking about sickle cell anemia, an inherited lifelong disease that affects thousands of Americans, mostly people of color. A disease that can lead to several trips to the hospital with painful complications that can worsen over time.
You have organ failure due to these, crises that you have over the years.
But now, for the first time ever, a major medical breakthrough that has given hope to thousands.
The way patients feel after this treatment, they will feel functionally better. They won't have the pain crisis anymore.
It's all straight ahead on Prescription for Life. Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Monica Robbins. It's estimated 100,000 Americans have sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell disease is a group of disorders that cause red blood cells to become crescent-shaped and break down, which can block blood flow and cause chronic pain. In this episode, we show you the ray of hope that just arrived for so many. In December, a major game changer for sickle cell patients. The FDA approved gene therapy treatments for this debilitating disease. Doctors call it a functional cure. Here's how it works. Doctors will now be able to snip a patient's DNA, blocking the debilitating effects of sickle cell and reducing the need for a donor.
You would get their stem cells, you modify them genetically to fix the disease in different ways, and then you perform a transplant of their own cells, but now modified so you can improve the disease.
WMAZ's Megan Western talks with a Georgia woman who has lived with the disease and knows how this new treatment will impact her life.
Shania Curtis has lived with sickle cell disease for 26 years.
I had my first sickle cell crisis at 3 months.
Curtis and her mother and brother are part of the nearly 100,000 people who live with the disease.
It's been very difficult.
Each crisis can be different. Her hands or legs may swell, and it brings long-term problems.
You deal with sepsis, you have TIAs and strokes, you have organ failure due to these, crises that you have over the years.
Since December 2022, Curtis has been in the hospital more frequently, each time for around 3 weeks, and her last crisis was one of the worst.
September 1st, I will end up having my second stroke.
She got a blood exchange transfusion where 40% of her blood was removed, a physically and emotionally draining process. So a new possible cure gives her hope.
It's exciting.
But after the many years, sickle cell has greatly impacted her organs, and she's in need of a hip replacement.
How do we fix those problems first?
And the gene therapy is priced at $2 million, which Curtis says is not accessible to all families.
I don't have $1 million. I don't have $2 million, but I have faith.
She's using that faith to launch her nonprofit, Sickle Cell University.
We are a home base. We're a beacon of hope for sickle cell patients and family members.
They'll provide doctoral references, resources, and mobile clinics in the community.
We're also about research and looking for different ways to, fix the damage it has caused already.
Now to our expert who is leading a trial at Cleveland Clinic. Joining me now is Dr. Robbie Hanna, who is a sickle cell expert at Cleveland Clinic Children's Hospital. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's, in simplest terms, explain what is sickle cell disease.
So sickle cell disease is a blood disease. It affects how red blood cells are formed. So many people have probably seen the pictures of the beautiful red blood cells, that they are circular. They can be squeezed as they go through our blood vessels so they can deliver the oxygen to the rest of the body. In patients with sickle cell disease, they are born with a defect in the coding instruction for our red blood cells. Think of our coding instruction as literally a textbook. And in one word, if there is a change in the letter, it can change the instruction. And people could say, really, one letter can change that? And I will give the word tasty. If you change that T to N, it becomes nasty. And that's what happened in red blood cells in sickle cell. There is one letter change in our DNA that give the instruction for the hemoglobin instruction. And the cell, instead of becoming circular, it becomes like literally a croissant shape, that it will be causing sickling when there is low oxygen. So what happened in that case, that the sickle cell, the red blood cells, accumulate against each other, and they will block the supply of blood to that tissue. That could be in the brain, that could be in the eye, it could be in the bone, and that can cause a lot of severe pain. And the cells, they just break down and cause anemia. But that also later in life can really affect the heart, the lung, the kidney. And in simplest way, it is a lifelong disease that affects many organs. It causes a lot of pain, a lot of organ dysfunction, and lead to an early death. The half-life expectancy, it's only around 40 to 43, which is half what it is for the general population.
Who does it primarily affect?
Excellent question. The majority of this, it is African American, but we do see it also in Hispanic. And that goes to really our evolution, because the origin, what our hypothesis medically, we think the reason why human beings start to have sickle cell, it's actually to escape the malaria infection, and that used to be mostly in Africa. But then with the immigration and the slavery and others, we have a lot of African American. It is estimated to have 100,000 people in the United States affected by sickle cell disease.
Is it always passed down if one or both parents have it?
Excellent question. So it is a genetic, it's inherited disease. So you could have one copy of it, and the other copy, if it's normal of your hemoglobin, you could have normal life. That's called sickle cell trait. You are just a carrier, but you don't manifest any of that disease symptoms or signs. But if that person marries another one who is a carrier or have a disease, then their children will have potentially, depending on if they are carrier or a disease, between 25% to 50% chance of having a disease.
What was the standard treatment?
So the sickle cell disease has been known since really 1918, when it was first discovered and described by a doctor in Chicago. But for many decades, we didn't have any therapies. And most of the patients died in their early childhood from infection or from anemia complication. But in the 60s and 70s, we discovered that they die from infection because their spleen doesn't work. So we started to give them, after a newborn screening and able to diagnose them, we give them penicillin. And that saved so many lives. But in the 90s, we discovered that a weak chemotherapy called hydroxyurea, that medicine can actually help improve the outcome in sickle cell disease and decrease the pain. And luckily, if you are really born in a place where you could get early attention to your sickle cell disease and you get hydroxyurea, almost 98% of kids will make it to adulthood. But until 2019, we really didn't have any other therapy. We went almost 100 years with only one drug approved for this. And then there was more newer therapy that helped, and they were approved in that year to help with the pain crisis, more with decreasing the severity of the pain crisis, one called Voxelotor, and the other one called crizanlizumab, and then another medicine called L-glutamine. Those three medications seem to help to decrease to some degree the pain crisis in this patient.
But in December of 23, something huge happened. 2 new drugs were approved by the FDA. What makes these drugs unique in the fact that not only are they the latest to treat this disease, they're a different type of drug?
Yeah, I am so excited and happy to talk about this new therapy that it is called gene therapy. So gene therapy, it is in a simplest way, is taking the stem cell that produce only blood. And I want to emphasize this is not going to change all the body. It's only going to change the stem cell that are producing blood. And being able to introduce either a new gene, and that's called gene addition, or change some of the gene function so they can produce fetal hemoglobin. That fetal hemoglobin, we all are born with a high level of that fetal hemoglobin, and at around 6 months, it turns off. So the adult hemoglobin rise, and that's when sickle cell problem starts. So they discovered that if we could turn the fetal hemoglobin and increase that production, that which happens in nature, some patients with sickle cell don't have a problem, so because of the fetal hemoglobin rise. So these two new gene therapies, which I can explain further a little bit about their process, will help to truly make that hemoglobin S, that's the one that causes the sickling, the change in the shape, much lower. So the patient are functionally cured from their sickle cell. They don't have that problem anymore. And it is one-time therapy that will last and be able to allow them to have their life. So these two studies, after extensive research in multiple phase 1, phase 2, and 3, the FDA determined it is safe, but also effective with high efficacy in terms of preventing the pain crisis and the complication of sickle cell disease to allow this patient truly to achieve all their potential in life.
So a one-time treatment sounds perfect, but is it affordable and is it covered by insurance?
I think it is a journey. I don't want to make it simple. It is not only one shot, you come to the office and get it, because it will involve multiple phases. The first phase is actually stimulating your body and bone marrow to give a stem cell that will be collected. We call that mobilization of stem cell. We have to achieve enough number of this that we can take them through a machine from your veins. So there is no surgery required, but that would be multiple cycles, sometimes one time, sometimes 2, or occasionally 3. Then we send them to a company. That's where either the gene addition or the gene editing using a technology called CRISPR that could precisely target the gene and change it will be done. And that takes approximately also another 2 to 3 months. Then the difficult part that most of the patients are familiar. We can't just give this new stem cell. We have to create home for them to be able to grow. So we need to give chemotherapy. This chemotherapy will really make their counts very low. It will make their immune system very low. So it does require around 4 weeks in the hospital until the new stem cells are growing. I told them it takes time to build a home and be able to produce new red blood cells. But when those are being produced and the patient recover from the side effect of chemotherapy, they can be discharged. So on average, it takes around 6 to 9 months from the beginning. If someone comes to me now until they are finished, it takes approximately 6 to 9 months to finish all of that, but only around 1 month of it probably in the hospital. So that's the first one. Is it possible? Is it safe? Yes, if the patient is in a good shape. Second, is it accessible? Can people get it, and is it affordable? And that's so important question. And right now, many people know that those are charged in millions. The cost is truly extensive due to the research and the time that it took for many of this pharma company to develop this. But I truly want to challenge ourselves, challenge the healthcare policies who are making that, and also healthcare institution. We have to put patient first. Sickle cell patient for many decades didn't have access to really novel therapies. For almost 100 years, we only have one therapies. We should make sure we have patients have access, being evaluated. And not everyone needs this gene therapy. Those are only for really patients who are the severe, because you need to weigh that risk of the chemotherapy and the side effect from that with the potential benefit and the functional cure that you could possibly achieve. So I would be cautious to make sure, one, you have access. Every patient deserves to be evaluated, and then make a determination based on their health, based on what their doctor thinks, and not just only the price. And my hope that we could really make this more affordable and be covered by both government-based, because most of our sickle cell patients to be admitting, it's really are from lower socioeconomic, and they have either Medicaid or a government-based health insurance, and making sure they are not being discriminated against compared with some of our commercial payer and have access to this life-saving therapy.
One of the things you're very concerned about is stigma. And you brought up a great point about who, the patient population is often. So what do you want people to know about stigma?
I think it's this patient's suffering. I'm quoting one of my patients. There is no more pain from sickle cell other than the pain I see when a physician or a nurse doubting that I am in pain. This sickle cell patient have suffered for many decades from racism in healthcare. They've been labeled drug addict, drug seeker. They were not being believed when they say we are in pain. They were having literally crushing in their bone, necrosis in their bone. But because they were African American, they were being questioned if they were there in the emergency room. And that's why we are seeing a huge drop in the access to healthcare when they become an adult. And that it is going and need to be our first goal. Only around 20% of adult patients with sickle cell, they see a hematologist. Most of their care is sporadic, it's reactive. When they have a pain, they go to their emergency room or being admitted. So, because they are afraid of that stigma. So they don't want to go because they are worried that the patient are not being believed. So we have to provide access and truly welcome this patient to get comprehensive care by our hematologist, cardiologist, nephrologist, because that disease affects every part of your body. And then some of them, they will be severe enough, they deserve this life-saving therapy, potentially, or other therapy like a bone marrow transplant. But it starts with access.
There is more hope on the horizon, though. You're in the middle of a clinical trial. What is your trial?
We are very excited at Cleveland Clinic Children's that we are really giving hope. So not only we are certified to give these two therapies that they are approved by the FDA, but we also want to improve on the gene therapy. So we have a clinical trial for adult and adolescents with severe phenotype of sickle cell disease that uses CRISPR, but also uses a novel enzyme called caspase-12. So it is really a kind of to improve on what it is already done, so could potentially be at higher efficiency of gene editing and be able to expand the indication for sickle cell disease so we could treat more patients. So I would encourage everyone who wants to be evaluated to contact us either for just the commercially approved gene therapy products or for a clinical trial. But it's exciting that there's going to be more clinical trial hopefully in the future.
What phase is your trial in right now?
We are in phase 2.
You're in phase 2, so we still have a few years to go. What's next on the horizon, in your opinion?
I would love to see gene therapy not requiring chemotherapy. I think this is only being given to create a space and get rid of the old bone marrow, that it is non-functioning and producing old. So there is interest in preclinical. We are doing studies in animal models and hopefully soon using different medication or antibodies that can create enough niche inside the bone marrow. There's also really more discoveries of medication, just pills that can be used to induce that fetal hemoglobin we talked about earlier to a high level that could prevent the sickling. So if a patient cannot or should not receive gene therapy, they could probably receive some pills. So it is exciting time because there is more research. Research is care, and we have to care for this patient and ask the question, how could we do the care better for them?
Thank you so much for your insight and, more importantly, your hope. And it's nice to know there are doctors out there who are going to advocate for patients who desperately need this care. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's our privilege to take care of this patient, and I hope that one day we can cure all of these patients.
Dr. Hannah talked about the trials going on in Cleveland. I talked with one of the patients in that trial. Here's what she had to say.
Every crisis is potentially life-threatening.
33-year-old Danielle Lee is an aspiring actress and self-proclaimed thrill seeker, but she's battled sickle cell anemia her entire life and at times spent weeks in the hospital fighting severe, debilitating pain.
When I was in school, I had 3 to 4 crises a year that landed me in the hospital, and then several others that didn't.
She's part of a Cleveland Clinic clinical trial testing an experimental gene editing therapy. It modified her own blood-forming stem cells to correct the sickle cell mutation.
The early result is showing a really very robust and very clinically meaningful pain relief. I'm excited to say that none of the patients who underwent this had any pain crisis.
In late September, doctors collected Danielle's stem cells. Then she spent a month in the hospital while chemotherapy destroyed her bone marrow to make room for the new cells. Her stem cells were then sent to a lab where they were genetically edited and corrected, and then infused back into her body. She hasn't had an episode since.
I use the term functional cure because what I mean by that, it would really enable the red blood cells to function in a normal way. It will not cure what effect happened already.
While Danielle encourages other sickle cell patients to consider it, she has advice.
There are risks associated with it as well, and it is a trial. So above all, make sure that you're doing it for yourself.
That's all for this episode of Prescription for Life. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Monica Robbins. We'll be back next week with another dose. Until then, wishing you and yours good health.